Hello again. We come now to the fourth lesson in this module on discipleship, and that is the encouragement for discipleship. The encouragement for discipleship. What is it that spurs us on? What is it that brings us to follow Him more fully? The Voice of the Martyrs is a magazine, and it is one of the issues carries the story about a Hindu who became a Christian, a man named Hoekema Raj, and surely I botched that pronunciation. Raj was in prison for killing a man when he became a Christian. Eventually, after his conversion, he went to Bible college and he returned to his home village to tell others about Jesus, which didn't make people very happy. That included his dad. His dad was very unhappy about his conversion to Christianity and so wanted to make his life miserable. One day, Hindu radicals began beating Hoekema as they drug him to the police station, and after 3 days of interrogation, mistreatment, they released him. You might ask, what keeps a guy going through that? That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of perseverance. When he later told fellow Christians about his ordeal, he said, I remembered Matthew 5, blessed are those who are persecuted. And I came away more excited about Jesus. Think about that. After persecution, coming away more excited, more encouraged about Jesus. We're going to think about that dilemma today. What keeps you excited? What keeps you encouraged about following Jesus, even when, especially when it's tough, especially when it's difficult? In the previous study, we considered how we enter discipleship, how we first come to follow Jesus. And then as we begin following Jesus, at first it might seem exciting and easy. At first you might be filled with encouragement. We love Jesus. We're amazed by all that He's done for us. It's so fresh in our minds. God seems so close to us. The feeling, the buzz is there. Other Christians seem so wonderful. And if you've changed from a drastically different lifestyle, it feels so good to be so different. But sooner or later, there will be difficulties that come. This is the next path in discipleship, when the difficulties come. Last time we looked at the initial, the change, that moment when you first set out on the path. Well, now you're down the path, and difficulties come. It may be obstacles that threaten to block us from being faithful. It may be internal. It may be things going on within you, within your mind, within your heart, struggles, distractions. It could be our own failures, times where we thought we were different. We thought now the path was going to look different. And then we find we're not so faithful. So what can encourage us? What can put our heart back into that place where we are energized? Consider the difficulties of discipleship in light of Luke 22. That's our text. Luke 22, and these 10 verses, verses 24 through 34. Luke 22, 24 to 34. This scene is the Last Supper. Jesus has already cast a shadow over this event by predicting His betrayal. So the disciples have argued already over who's the greatest. And so where's the progress here? After 3 years of following Jesus, still, He's going to be betrayed. And then Jesus says that Satan will attack Peter, and Peter and all the disciples will desert Him. This doesn't seem like a very encouraging moment, does it? But under the discouragement, you find the real, true encouragement. So much false encouragement is being stripped away here, being removed here, to get us to the core, to get us to what's at the center of following Jesus, what energizes us and encourages us more than anything as we follow Jesus. Let's find it here, underneath all of the false areas of encouragement, here in Luke 22, 24 to 34. Luke 22, beginning at verse 24. A dispute arose among them, the disciples, as to which of them was considered to be greatest. Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, Satan is asked to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers." But he replied, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." And Jesus answered, "I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me." Initially, that might not look very encouraging. There's real encouragement here. How did Jesus encourage them? How does he encourage us in difficult times, in times where it seems to be cast under a shadow, to keep following him? What reason can he give to us? And it's the same reason he gave us to follow him in the first place. We're returning back to the beginning. The same thing that brought us to Jesus is what keeps us in Jesus and following Jesus. And it is Jesus himself. Jesus is our encouragement. We need nothing more. We need not add anything. Jesus himself is the encouragement. At the core here, every difficulty in the passage finds an answer in Jesus. Is Jesus enough? Someone once said that Jesus, you will never know if Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. And maybe he brings us in our own discipleship paths to those places where he is all we have in order to remind us that he is all the encouragement we need. Maybe you've been there already. Like we talked about last time, asking you if you've been lost. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt alone? Have you ever felt as though Jesus is literally all you've got? Some of you perhaps know that feeling far better than I know that feeling. Luke 22 occurs on the night of Passover. As I said, there's already a dark cloud above that has cast a shadow on this moment. Jesus has told them he's about to suffer. He talks about sacrificing his body and blood, and then the bombshell. He drops this news that one of them is going to betray him. They begin whispering to each other. Who do you think it is? Do you think it could be so-and-so? And maybe at this point, a lot of things that they'd been thinking and feeling about each other comes out. Well, I always wondered why Jesus chose that person. Of course, it's got to be that person. He hasn't really been in it wholeheartedly from the beginning. It didn't take much to move from all of this bragging about who is the best, about why it couldn't be themselves because each had done this or that, how they'd shown courage or faith, who was the most valuable disciple. Jesus had talked about his kingdom, and then naturally the whisperings turned to speculation about who's going to be in what seat in Jesus' great royal court in the kingdom. Jesus knows what they're talking about, and he challenges them, saying, essentially, basically, you are thinking like the world thinks. This is the way that the Gentiles operate, and you're no different from them. Me first. That's the way the world thinks. And here Jesus is going to tell them and show them that is not the way his kingdom works. I've been with you as a servant. Everything's turned on its head with Jesus. And yet in that should be a great encouragement to us. There's 4 particular things that we find here. Jesus tells them and us that, first of all, followers of Jesus should not focus on what place they have in his kingdom. Followers of Jesus should not focus on what place they have in his kingdom. It simply is not appropriate. Here Jesus was talking about sacrificing. He's talking about suffering. He's talking about giving of themselves. And they were talking about, what can I get? Who's most important? It's never appropriate for Jesus' followers to focus on their place in God's kingdom because it is God's kingdom. He decides, and he alone decides. And he decides differently from the world. He uses a different criteria from the world, a different criteria from the way that our minds and our hearts often work. It's not about self. It's not about what I can get. Following Jesus is about loving him and serving others instead of loving self and taking from others or defeating others. It's never appropriate to focus on place because then we're thinking about what we deserve, what we're entitled to, instead of focusing on grace, mercy, and goodness. Popular event in the United States is the Kentucky Derby, an annual horse race that takes place in Kentucky. And you'll see at the end, this horse that wins, the winning jockey, the one who rides the horse, will celebrate, circle the track, pumping fists, raising arms in victory, accepting all the congratulations and all the adulation from others. Answering interview questions, one might think that it was the jockey who did all the work. What about the horse? Shouldn't the horse be the one who gets the credit? Of course, a jockey does some things, and there are good jockeys and there are bad jockeys, and the jockey is very important. But when you watch so many Kentucky Derbies, it is the horse that carries the jockey around the finish line. The horse carries the jockey across the finish line. The jockey never carrying the horse across. That's the same thing with discipleship. It's never about us. It's always about Jesus. He is the one who's doing everything. Until we've settled that, there's always going to be difficulties. There's always going to be discouragement in following Jesus, because at that point we're not really following Jesus anymore. It's become about us. Discipleship isn't easy. We don't see people forgetting about self very often to focus on others because it takes work. It's foreign to us. It isn't natural to us. It's like, as we talked about in one of our last lessons, it's like putting out nets when you haven't caught anything all day. Totally counterproductive to focus on others instead of self. We have to see someone else do it first. And that's Jesus' point in verse 27. I am among you, he says, as one who serves. He uses this picture. Who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? It's obvious. It's the one who's at the table. That's the Gentile thinking. That's our earthly thinking. That's how we operate. And Jesus is saying, welcome to my kingdom, where actually the one who's greater is the one who serves. It's an upside down kingdom. And followers of Jesus should focus on that upside down pattern. That's the second point to notice here. When we consider the encouragement of discipleship, followers of Jesus should focus on Jesus' pattern. We shouldn't focus on our place in the kingdom. Followers of Jesus should focus on Jesus' pattern. This can work in a lot of different ways. Anytime you're trying to learn how to do anything, there's a certain pattern, there's a certain model. And when you first start out in it, it might not look so good. It might be all over the place. But as you do it again and again and again, as you continue to work at it, you start to actually follow a certain pattern. Think about this with mowing lawn. If you've never mowed a lawn before, you might have some rows that are pretty wavy, pretty off. And yet the more you do it, the more you start to have a straight pattern. The more you start to know exactly how it works. That's how we learn to serve others. We focus on Jesus' pattern. We focus on his line. And we head straight for it. We regularly read through the Gospels. We pay attention to how he put his comfort aside and how he is the one who serves. How he goes to where people are, how he sacrifices his reputation, how he sacrifices his comfort to associate with the needy, to associate with outcasts, to associate with people that were not pleasant, people that were written off. That's following Jesus. And unless we conform ourselves again and again, repeatedly, to that pattern, we will not have the encouragement to do the hard work of going to those same people. Jesus gives another incentive. This moves to the third point. Jesus gives another incentive, another encouragement to keep following him now in verses 28 through 30. He's telling them and us that discipleship should focus on not only Jesus' pattern, but on the prize of his presence. So not the place in his kingdom, but his pattern and the prize of his presence. Yes, Jesus will give his disciples his kingdom, and much more than that, his presence. Because the kingdom is nothing without the king. So often, we want Jesus' stuff. But do we want Jesus? Enjoying a meal together, this scene is the perfect picture. It was a way to communicate love and trust, connection. They're doing it right here in the upper room. This is the way that Jesus works. And no doubt the disciples were sad when Jesus told them in verses 16 and 17 that this is going to be our last supper together for a while, but only for a while. They would be together again. Jesus was telling them to focus on something ahead in the future that would get them past the discouragement that was coming. Jesus knew that things are going to get confusing. And so he's pointing them, saying, okay, although this is the last meal, there's something even further ahead. Know that we will meet again. And so through the distractions and the detours that are coming, the only thing big enough to see past all the negativity and all the confusion is Jesus himself, their prize, eternity with him. After spending 3 years with Jesus, they're beginning to realize he is the prize. He is worth it himself. And such a realization only comes after you spend time with Jesus. To so many non-believers, to so many who do not follow Jesus, of course, it sounds preposterous. It sounds silly. Christianity doesn't seem all that good because what they're interested in is not Jesus himself. They've never spent time with him. They've never come to know him. And so they want Jesus' stuff. But then as you start to get to know him, you spend time around him, hear from him, learn from him, get to know his pattern, just his presence, you start to realize there's a lot more in him than even in anything he can give. You see this with kids. It makes more and more sense that Jesus, when he's teaching, says that we ought to have faith that is childlike in a sense, because you see it in the way kids grow up. First of all, parents come home from a long trip when maybe their kids were at babysitters or maybe they were left somewhere else. And the parents come home and the kids are so excited to see their parents again. They say, "Daddy, Daddy, we're so glad you're home. Look what I drew for you while you were gone. Look what I made for you." And then many parents will testify that as they get older, that response, that reaction changes a little. "Daddy, Daddy, we're so glad you're home. What did you get for us? What did you bring back for us?" And so the parent feels like, I guess I'm not really the prize anymore. It's what can I give? And we all get into that mentality where we focus more on what he can bring us than on him. Is Jesus the prize you are pursuing in your own life of discipleship? Have you perhaps gotten sidetracked where now you are so focused on what can Jesus give me? What can Jesus provide for me? That you haven't stopped to just savor his precious presence. Do you have a time in the day that you spend with him without asking for anything? Examine your prayers. Are prayers filled with requests, demands? Or is it simply communication with Jesus? When you look forward to glory, and when you think about heaven, what is it that's most appealing to your heart? What is it that you most look forward to? In my own work as a pastor, I can be sometimes dismayed when I talk with those who are elderly, and I say, what are you most looking forward to about heaven? And I wish so often that more and more I would hear the answer, being with Jesus. You might talk about relatives that you'll see there. You might talk about the freedom from pain, a new body. All these things that are no doubt wonderful, but when you go to the book of Revelation and when you look into, when we're given a little look through the doorway into glory, the same thing is always at the center. What makes heaven heaven? It's that Jesus is there in His presence. And that's more than enough. We have another encouragement, fourth encouragement, verses 31 and 32. When you have Jesus and when you have His presence, that means, fourth, you also have His prayers. You have His prayers. Our faith should be in Jesus praying for us. This is great encouragement. And it still is into this day, knowing that Jesus lives, knowing that Jesus intercedes for us at the right hand of God, we still have this encouragement that Jesus speaks for us. Our being able to follow Jesus doesn't depend on us. Remember the answer to what is sanctification? Sanctification is the work of God's free grace. We don't see many of the obstacles or enemies. So how can we deal with them? Peter didn't even know what was coming. He didn't even know that behind the scenes, Jesus pulls back the veil just a bit here and shows that behind the scenes, Satan was making a request of Peter to Jesus. Satan had plans for him. Jesus had to warn him here of what Satan wanted to do. And yet Peter has this great confidence, as Peter so often does. He is sure he could deal with whatever is coming down the road. He didn't know where the path to following Jesus would lead. He didn't even understand the challenges that were just around the corner. He didn't think he needed any help because he didn't see what pressures would come from the outside and what fears and insecurities were still within his heart. We will see it clearly. He didn't know it yet. He didn't think he needed anyone praying for him. Maybe he even didn't think he needed to pray. So how could he possibly know what to pray for? And Jesus knows exactly what to pray for us. He knows your path ahead. The psalmist, we know, tells us that every day ordained for us was written in his book before one of them came to be. And so Jesus knows exactly what you'll need today. He knows what you'll need tomorrow. He looks ahead at the next weeks and months that are behind the veil to us, so uncertain to us. And He knows exactly what you'll need. Jesus knows exactly what to pray for us. Notice the power of Jesus praying. The verb is an aorist verb. It's in the aorist tense, which means it's a one-time contained event in the past. Jesus only had to ask God once. He didn't say, I'm praying for you at this moment. He asked God once in the past, and it was done. Jesus prayed that Peter's faith wouldn't fail. This word fail, our word eclipse, the English word eclipse, comes from this Greek phrase that's translated fail. And an eclipse occurs when one object, like the moon, gets in front of another object like the sun and blots out the sun temporarily from earth. Jesus prayed that Satan would not be able to get in front of Peter's faith, to blot out and to darken his view of God. And Satan didn't, because Jesus says, when you have turned back, Jesus knows the outcome already. He's previewing the outcome. When you have turned back, you will fail, but when you have turned back, indicating God had already decided that Peter would turn back. How Jesus prays for Peter tells us something about how Jesus prays for us. Jesus didn't pray that Peter's faith wouldn't be tested. He didn't say, please keep Peter from challenge. Please keep Peter from testing. He just prays that it wouldn't fail. Peter needed to have his faith challenged because at this point we see Peter's false confidence. We see Peter's encouragement. Where at this moment does Peter's encouragement come from? Does it come from Jesus fully? No. It might look like great faith. It might look like he has all this courage, but Jesus sees through it, and he sees that Peter's courage and his encouragement comes more from his ability and his solidarity with Jesus than from Jesus himself. And so Jesus knows Peter needs this challenge that's coming. He needs this test that's coming, because that's going to strip away the false courage, the false hope, and get Peter to rely on the very source of true hope and courage. Sometimes Jesus lets us experience difficulty and discouragement in our discipleship because we are so self-reliant, so confident in our abilities. We're not really following Jesus. We're following ourselves. And that difficulty is what will bring us back to Jesus. And so the call here is that as you plot out your course would always be plotted out in terms of, how will I be close to Jesus? My wife and I were recently visiting with a couple who was visiting our church. We're just in town for the weekend. And when we asked the woman of this couple, who grew up in a very different area, but yet now was living in a nearby town, we asked, well, why in the world would you come to this place? And she was talking about how she was choosing her place where she was going to live. She had all these different options before her, and she said, well, I was looking at where these particular churches were. And this town had this church, and so I wanted to move to that town. And she almost apologized for it. She said, I know it's crazy. I know that's such a strange thing. And as I was hearing that, I thought, wow, it's so seldom that I hear in our own country people making a choice of where to live based on, is there that particular church close by? That's so often an afterthought. Well, we'll figure it out once we get there. And then I talk with couples who then get into the spot, and I ask them if they have found church fellowship, if they found a place where they can be connected with Jesus Christ. And they say, boy, the churches in our area just aren't that good. It's really tough. We'd have to drive a long ways. Again, it's an upside-down kingdom. Jesus is saying, no, the important thing for you in your walk as a disciple is, will you be able to be close to me? Because I am your encouragement. Because I am your source of confidence. Are we mapping life's route so that we can stick close to Jesus? Are we depending on Jesus and His encouragement to pray for us and to help us and to fuel us when we're following Him? You've seen 4 ways that Jesus encourages us not to give up following Him, especially when life gets challenging. No matter how discouraged we get, no matter how difficult being Jesus' disciple might be, He shows us that we shouldn't focus on place, trying to get someplace, trying to achieve someplace in life, but rather we should focus entirely on Jesus' pattern. Second, humbly serving others, even sacrificing Himself for God's glory. And the only place we should focus on as Jesus' disciples is to be with Jesus here and after. That's the prize that we should set our eyes on, not the prizes that the world offers. All through our journey, our faith rests on Jesus praying for us. That's the 4th encouragement. Jesus praying for us, not on how hard we work, how great we are, how courageous we are, how strong we are. All those encouragements will help us. But finally, there's a bonus encouragement, a 5th encouragement. We must persevere even through our failures. Because we have to end this scene knowing that Peter did fail. He did deny he knew Jesus 3 times before the crucifixion. And yet he didn't fail fully. He didn't fall away completely from Jesus by God's grace. There's something there for us. Even when we stumble, even when we fall, even when we surprise ourselves with how frail we are, how faithless we can be. Maybe you failed to follow Jesus lately. Maybe you've had your own stumbles. Maybe you've been following your friends more, following what's more fashionable. Maybe where you thought you were going to be so courageous, you find actually you're filled with fear. It's time to take a fresh look at Jesus. Maybe reading through one of the Gospels, getting to know Jesus and his ways and his patterns a little better once again. Because discipleship, following Jesus, is all about, of course, Jesus. Not what we're able to do for him, but what he will do for us. The main encouragement that I love from Ephesians 3, that prayer that closes Ephesians 3, is that our eyes would be opened to the immeasurable power that Jesus Christ has and the work that he can do through us. But it's Jesus' power accomplishing work always within us. My prayer for you is that you also would have your eyes open, just as the end of Ephesians 3 says, to see what Jesus can do, the power that is at work beyond what we can comprehend and working through us. Again, we close with points to ponder and principles to practice. Points to ponder. Do you ever get discouraged in your following Jesus? Identify those times. When do you get discouraged in following Jesus, and how do you get discouraged in following Jesus? What are those times of discouragement? But then second, what was it about Jesus that drew you to follow him initially? As you go down the path of discipleship, maybe the thing that we need to do most often is we need to go back to the beginning, and we need to say, what was it that drew us to follow Jesus initially? This is something that's so good to do. If you're in a marriage relationship, sometimes that's such a blessing to be able to look back at pictures from when you were first dating, to be able to look back at pictures from when you were first married, and to remember, that's why I married this person. It brings us back to the beginning and gives us fuel for the present. So what was it about Jesus that drew you to follow him initially? And why are you following him now? That's the question for today. Why are you following him now? Those are the 3 points to ponder, and equally 3 principles to practice. How can you experience Jesus' presence in a more practical way this week? How can you experience Jesus' presence? If his presence is the ultimate encouragement, how can you experience his presence in a more practical way this week? Then as we're thinking about discipling another Christian, how does Jesus' presence factor into discipling another Christian? How does Jesus' presence factor into our discipling another Christian? And then finally, if Jesus is praying for you as you follow him, what should you be doing for the person you are discipling? If Jesus is praying for you as you follow him, what should you be doing for the person that you're discipling? Develop a list of practical things, concrete things, that you could pray for the person that you're discipling. That concludes our 4th lesson. We look forward to the 5th lesson, which is the enlistment for disciples.